So we're going to start in the forward to the first edition in the book. And it's page X. Whoops, sorry, I told you to get loud if I put my head in the wrong position. XIII. So Roman numeral 13. And there's a big, huge W if you're looking at your book. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So who is the we? People get confused about that if they just walk in our rooms and they see the we on the wall, and then somebody says, well, we're a we program, and we may well be a we program, but we need to know who this is telling the story, so I have a shot when they say, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps, and I'm listening to someone in the room who doesn't have a clue what they have. Does that make sense? So to focus on this, we want to know who the we is. Now, we're trying to catch up with them, and then by a vision for you, see to it that your relationship with him is right, and then great things will come to pass for you and countless others, right? And they talk to us about cleaning house and all the things. So going through the process, and then we'll surely join them, these we, as we trudge the road of happy destiny. Does that make sense? But I'll have to awaken in the spirit because all these people are dead. So the only way I'm joining them is to die to self in this realm and start communicating in the spirit. Does that make sense? Okay. So then it says, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So that's what I'm going to try and do for you, reading their text and then illuminating my experience and seeing if you can relate. And if we relate on some level, then we'll share that experience. Does that make sense? But either way, I'm showing you my experience and how to find yours, not telling you what yours is. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to go from there. I think what I want to do right away is get into the doctor's opinion. And I don't think I want to get into the letter, but rather I want to go to the bottom of XXVIII. And let's talk about the very bottom paragraph. It says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Yes. Sean is apparently into the effect produced. Did anyone else like Sean maybe had some clean time, sober for a while, but you can still sort of sense the effect? It's a good idea every once in a while just to check that. It's a sensory effect, right? And just my thoughts are powerful enough, my remembrance is powerful enough, many years sober, to think about and bring to consciousness the awareness of being aware, that effect produced by alcohol, by opiate drug. Does it make sense? So then it says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. True from the false about what? There's a page in here, I may not get to it tonight, but the alcoholics talk about, and there is a solution that at a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, and a certain point in the addictive disorder of every addict, there comes a time where you cannot differentiate this truth from the false. He said he cannot bring to consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. And we don't teach that in clinical realms typically. We talk to them about trigger lists and, some kind of cognitive discipline and things like that, but in full-blown addictive disorder, it's their experience and it's my lived experience that I don't have that capacity. I've lost that capacity. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's true for you, but okay. So to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. How many of you got to a place in your addictive disorder that it wasn't too good, but it was what it was? How many of you kind of knew it wasn't working out? How many of you weren't too sure what to do about it? So it says they're restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Back to Sean's yes. So I'm sitting around restless, irritable, and discontent because I'm trying to be abstinent because all my fellows have said, just don't pick up no matter what. You got this, fight. And I'm incapable of that. In fact, my delusion tells me that anything's better than this, or what's the use, or what's the harm? I'll just quit tomorrow. Yeah? I don't know how many manifestations of that I've gone through, but many. Yeah? And then it says, after they've succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. Have you ever done that? Maybe not around drinking, but around using, and yet, whoa, darn it. Dang it, never again. I'm going to tell somebody this time. Did you do it more than once? So what the authors say is this is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. So that's the doctor opining to an alcoholic who would read this, that based on what we've seen, you're going to have this change, this rearrangement in the way you, basically an inversion. Instead of body, mind, spirit, we need to start being driven in the spirit and using the mind as intended. And I can't do that on my own. Does it make sense? Okay. So I want to jump right to Bill's story. I don't want to spend a lot of time in the medical today because I always like the way Bill tells the story. And it seems like us addicts, alcoholics, we respond better to peer models anyway. So this is just another peer telling us what went on for him, see if we can relate, and then see as he lays out the experience. Fair enough? So let's start on page 5 of Bill's story. It says, liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. I would like for you to try and catch up with is there a, I just thought I'd stop until everyone was done with their phone call because I can see people back there not being able, I don't want any people being angry, right? Can you recall in your addictive state or watching someone you cared about in theirs when it became evident that they weren't doing what they wanted to do, they were doing what they had to do? Can you recall that? Because that's what he's talking about. It ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. How many of you can feel that when you internalize what he's talking about? That's when we start calling to your attention the reality of the experience of powerlessness, not the concept. And then it says he describes it, bathtub gin, two bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. How many do I get drinkers in the room? Did you notice how your capacity went up? I think people, it slips by us, right? We're starting with a half a pint, and then it's a pint, and then we're in a 5th, and then pretty soon, to James's point, all of a sudden, we've got a handle in the freezer, and we're pouring that back with water and pretending no one notices. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I'd pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. Any of you remember those mornings? A tumbler full of gin followed by a half dozen bottles of beer would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Look at the way the language Bill's using. Very intentional language. Any of you ever still had to go to work when you were drinking or using like that? Or at least were making the effort to go to work? And there ain't no way, man, I can't get near a toothbrush without dying, choking on it. I got to get this down, and I can't get the first two down, and I'm almost out in the house, so I better throw up the next one in a cup so I can throw her down one more time, because I got to get well enough to get out of here to get more. Anyone else know what he's talking about? Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. How many of you lived in that little delusion? I'm drinking my vomit in order to get well enough to buy more poison, but I got this shit. I got a plan. And there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. Did you have somebody with you watching you on the journey that would almost give up, and then you'd pull it together for a few days, and they're like, oh, thank God he's got it, or she's got it. That was good. I'm glad you're paying attention. You hear that? She's paying attention, went right by the rest of you. Gradually, things got worse. I always like the way addicts, alcoholics think. He's describing a pretty dire situation from a guy who was spending in tens of thousands and chattering in millions. And now he's hiding from his wife and can't pay his bills at the bars and the delicatessen. And he describes that as gradually things got worse. My mother-in-law died, my wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. He uses weird words, but we can figure out what happened, right? Most of us don't talk about how we went on a prodigious bender anymore, but I have gone out to celebrate what I thought was a good fortune and drank right through my good fortune. Anyone else? So he says, I woke up. This had to be stopped. How many of you woke up? I'm talking about that gripping fear. I can't do this anymore. This isn't safe. I'm about to lose everything I ever cared about, and I don't care about much anymore. Yep, okay. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. He's talking about gradually waking up to the fact that he wasn't drinking by choice. He was drinking by necessity, a whole different level of trouble. Did you get it? How many of you had to go get medicated in order to do anything? And then once you got medicated, maybe you overshot the mark and then you couldn't do anything. So before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. So now we have agreement. I mean it, not even one. Have any of you been on that journey? So shortly afterward, I came home drunk. It's very frustrating, isn't it? So I can feel it in the room. Who's feeling that? That agitation that's just coming up out of a nameless place. That's that spirit we're sharing right here. That powerless and unmanageability, because we can still bring it to consciousness, not with sufficient force maybe, but sitting here stone cold sober, that's a real unpleasant place to reside, isn't it? So I said, where had been my high resolve? Did you ever start to question your own thinking? What happened? Well, I still to this day question my own thinking. But because of this process, I've gained access to power. So I can submit my thinking to a power greater than me. And does that make sense? But before that, the power greater than me that I could submit it to came in the form of a bottle. So it hadn't even come to mind. Somehow, someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? Any of you ever question your sanity? How many of you are like me and you questioned it privately, but outwardly you declared, well, I'm crazy, you better just stay away. It was part of my act. Any of you? Of course I act this way. I'm an alcoholic. Dad said, find something you're good at and stick with it. I began to wonder for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. So again, they're equating the idea of alcoholic insanity as an appalling lack of perspective. Does that make sense? So renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. What does he mean? Yeah, how many of you had a little clean time? And at first you were really timid and you made sure you made all your commitments and you did all your check-ins. And then gradually you just quit doing any of that. Because I went from the experience of grace to the illusion of control. Does that make sense? Since I could laugh at the Jen Mills, now I had what it takes. One day I walked into the cafe to telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar asking myself how it had happened. Did you ever accidentally get loaded? We laugh about it, and we probably put ourselves in a position for it to happen, but I walked in many times with no intention to do it. Anyone know what I'm talking about? So as the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I'd manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. Now that's when the illusion of control has taken over my thinking. I've already put it in my body, which means I've set the terrible cycle in motion. Now my body and my mind are in charge. I got a phenomenon called craving beyond my mental control. But in order to feel better about the experience I'm about to have, I'm going to call it a choice. I suggest to you, get on the building, jump off. Halfway down, say, I choose to hit the ground. Tell me if it makes you feel better. Because you didn't affect the outcome, because the cycle was already in motion. Does it make sense? And we don't take this as seriously as that, but we might want to if we think this is our condition. Does that make sense? Okay. So then it says, the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. So when he says that, I want you to take a minute, think about some clean time, then think about getting yourself out there again and waking up to that, oh no, I did it again. And think about that remorse, horror, hopelessness. Anybody? And where's my people that have never relapsed again, but you have had those using dreams, those drunk dreams? Any of you in the room? Did you not wake up with the same remorse, horror, hopelessness until you could come to consciousness? Are you sharing the experience with him, or am I just being silly? He says it's unforgettable. So if you've been there, you've been there, right? I see it all the time on social media. If you know, you know. Okay? So the courage to do battle was not there. Listen to what he's talking about. Remorse, horror, hopelessness, what's the use? I'm going to burn it all down. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me that the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. He's watching the world around him, the economic world, collapse. And he's equating his particular situation to the world he finds himself in. Have any of you ever done that? He says the market would recover, but I wouldn't. See, logically, he knew that markets recover because he was the analyst. He was the guy. But of his own condition, he's lost all hope. How many of you got there? If I don't try again, I can't fail again. Try and kill ourselves. We do a lot of, we've kind of got death on the installment plan rolling when we're, so then he says that was the market will recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. So what did you do when you got suicidal ideations? Some people actually try and take their own life. Some people succeed in taking their own life. Sometimes people load up a syringe and hope they don't wake up. And sometimes they do exactly what James said. Just double down on the booze or the drugs and see how it comes out. All right, so no, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that, so 2 bottles and oblivion. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony for 2 more years. How many of you were in a long run and you just knew that you knew that you knew that you needed out and you could not get out? Endless cycles of detoxes and residentials and, okay. Yeah, and some it does, and some people it activates it. I mean, I've met people that go to prison and they don't use the whole time they're down. They hit the streets, they're high, and before they get, off the bus. And I've seen the other. So sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. And then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. How many of you started learning about showing up? Doctors don't come to our houses as commonly anymore, but started showing up at ERs and described your conditions in such a way as to get relief, either from some kind of Valium, Ativan, whatever. What happened after they started showing you that benzos could make that crazy a little better? How many of you got on some opiates? So it says, next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. Did you notice how it accelerated as you ramped up? People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking. I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. How many of you got put into a hospital and you weren't all that thrilled to go, but you had to fade a little heat? So it says, under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I'd been seriously ill bodily and mentally. Any of you get to a detox and maybe a treatment where they explain to you that addictive disorder was a real thing, and then you started feeling a little better, maybe about yourself as your mind cleared, and you started to experience a little hope, and you encouraged each other in a safe environment? Yeah? How many of you got to a safe environment and tried to figure out ways to get drugs brought into the place so you get high in the... Okay. So we know who's taking what seriously. There's always that element. But I like us to sort of just be honest about where we've been. I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally. It relieved me somewhat to learn that with the alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, which is some of those things we talked about without going into those chapters. Though it often remains strong in other respects. So how many of you could put your life back together for a while? You get yourself pretty tore up, but then you'd straighten up and you'd get your life back together, and a bunch of commitments going again, and then something would go wrong. Any of you done that more than once? Okay, so it says my incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. We're not talking about when you really didn't want to stop, when you just wanted the people to think you wanted to stop. We're talking about when you really wanted to stop. Desperate desire. I'm not having fun. This is not something, and I know it's going to go all bad. Yeah? So the fact that I have this phenomenon called craving, that it's beyond my mental control and it's going to happen, started to make sense to me. Does that make sense? And the doctor called it abnormal reaction. That's what perhaps an allergic response was. So if you're a drinker, any of you drinkers? To check it out. When you drank, did you find alcohol energized you? You know, it's a sedative. So that would be an abnormal response to a sedative. Where's my opiate addicts? Need I say more? You get a little of that stuff in you and you're all kinds of energy, right? But that's an abnormal response. Where's my meth addicts? That stuff calm you down? Okay, so we got so that if that's happening in us, that's an abnormal reaction. That's the one symptom that we have that says, I've got this disorder. So it's real now. It's not a theory because it happens in me. Does that make sense? Okay, so understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. How many of you got a good dose of self-understanding and then marched out to take back, reclaim your place in society? He says, for 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. Another abnormal term in modern language. But what's he talking about?
The Christmas goose at the poulterers.
When the goose hangs high, what is that symbolic of?
Self-esteem.
Winning. I'm winning. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. Look at the picture Bill paints. You ever watched people go off a ski jump? It's like the ground beneath them just gets further and further away, doesn't it? How many of you had some clean time and then set the cycle in motion again? Can you relate to the metaphor? Not only did it get bad, but it got bad quick. Okay. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. How many of you got told that the way you were using, you had serious health things developing? How many of you sort of knew they were telling you the truth? How many of you couldn't muster up enough want to care? Yeah, I know I'm dying. Tell me when. That'd be useful. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker, the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. See why I ask you the question first? Because we want to find ourselves with Bill is. We want to, because Bill's about to describe another experience that we also want to join him on. All right, so it was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities and my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who'd gone on before. How many of you never really saw yourself in situations of incarceration, homelessness, multiple hospitalizations until you started finding yourself there? How many of you kept thinking, well, I'm just going to take it serious now, I'm going to arrest this now? And then maybe it repeated or got worse. Anybody? Okay. He said, I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all, but what would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. That's probably the point at which Creator entered into Bill's consciousness, because he thought of someone other than Bill for just a minute. When we turn our thoughts to another, a window opens into consciousness and power flows in. And even though his thinking's not right, he asked an honest request. Does that make sense? I thought of her. What would I not give to make amends to her? And you know what amends are for the loved ones who have watched us in a living death? To come back to life and start showing others the way to life and start living an abundant life. That's how. What would I not give? Well, you'll give your life. You'll give your life to gain life. And he's starting to describe the beginnings of his spiritual experience before he knew what he was going to have to do. All he had to do was turn his thoughts to another. Does it make sense? No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. That's another really powerful metaphor. What happens if you struggle in quicksand? He's now come to the realization he's so broken he can't even swim out. Pretty powerful use of words and language, isn't it? He can see there's no way out. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit, and then came the insidious insanity of that first drink, and on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. Then he says to you, he's given you hope in the midst of the darkness, how dark it is before the dawn. So if you're reading him and you're still not on the path, that's why there's people in rooms to this day saying, keep coming back. Because all of us know there's only 3 types of people in any recovery room. The guy in their early sobriety, the guy in the middle of their sobriety, and the guy in the last of their sobriety. That's the three that are there. So we're always talking to the guy in his last day and see if we can renew him before he goes out and tears it up. Does that make sense? So in reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the 4th dimension of existence. What's he talking about? What were the dimensions of that time? He lived in basically what were known 3 dimensions, right? So he's talking about a 4th dimension, which means we're beyond time and space in this 4th dimension, yes? How many of you have learned as you've grown in your recovery that we start to live more and more present in the here and now? So you're starting to understand what he's trying to describe to the new one who needs a little hope, yes? He says, here's the description of it, I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. So he promises to the reader that you will know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is every bit as progressive as the condition we're coming back from. Does that make sense? He's speaking life to you from that position. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. Any of you, if you had a kitchen, do you ever just sit by yourself? So with a certain satisfaction, I reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. Did you ever get yourself the house to yourself and have a good stash? This is going to be a good day, right? My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. Are any of you drinkers? So a lot of you that weren't real drinkers, you may not know that about us, but drinkers are hiders. We got it stashed everywhere, just in case you try and throw it all out. And we never know when you might not be watching when we run out to the trash, and I may need one in a bush outside so I can take a belt before I come back in. And I have noticed that you meth addicts are a little sneaky like that too. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. So you got to go back in your memory to that one guy that was worse than you in your addiction. You know what I'm talking about? When no matter how bad it gets, at least I'm not that bad yet. Because that's who's coming to visit. And you can tell from his language, I'm not that bad yet. And he's now coming, and Bill's drunk and got a stash, and Lois is out of the house. Okay. So he says, it was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Dude does not show up sober. Rumor had it that he'd been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. It is so impossible that this guy is sober and reaching out to me. He must have escaped his captors. So he says, of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Then he says, unmindful of his welfare. You ever just wanted to be with somebody, you knew it was going to be all bad, but you wanted to just be with somebody who knew it was going to be all bad with you? Because we wear them out, right? She said, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a JAG. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility, the very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. So he wants to call your attention to the way he's thinking. His being able to drink the way he wants to with his friend, unmindful that he's trying to be sober. He just escaped his imprisonment. And he's describing it as an oasis. So what is an oasis? It may be life-saving water in an arid place. But it is more likely just more sand, an illusion. But now ask yourself, because we're about to describe an experience Bill has, was this an oasis or was this a mirage? We think we know things, and it's going to go on and on. Oh, no. This is the beginning of the end. Watch what happens now. So drinkers are like that. The door opened, and he stood there fresh-skinned and glowing. People chuckle because men typically don't describe other men they drink with as fresh-skinned and glowing. It's just not a thing, right? So to use that terminology means there's something striking here. I'm taking a risk to try and describe a phenomenon before me. And he said there was something about his eyes. How many of you, when you were using, never quite had a clear eye, couldn't look at people? Who's seen their booking photos? He was inexplicably different. What had happened? He was so striking that he's automatically questioning the experience before him. Any of you ever had such an encounter? He says, I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Have you ever been disappointed but curious? I'd rather that he drank with me, but not too much. Well, what's up with this? Yeah? Is he a cop? So he says, come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, Simply but smilingly, he said, I've got religion. Now be honest, I don't care what your religious leanings are. You know yourself to be a certified train wreck. You're sitting there drunk and drinking. Your buddy is surprisingly sober sitting with you, and when you ask him what's up, he says, I found God. Now admit it, regardless of your religious leanings, the fun meter goes, this is going to suck. I am going to get such a frickin' lecture. Holy, nothing worse than a drinker off the alcohol. Yes? No? Okay. So watch this, because it's very different. This is an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. So his experience with him, he's not the man he knew. He's made new. He says, I was aghast, so that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now, I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. Go ahead and talk. Let me fill my glass. But then it says he did no ranting. When I'm expecting a sermon, and I know that I should be getting one, and I don't get one, you now have my attention. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I know you know, and you ain't behaving the way I expect you to behave. He said, in a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. He's starting to give his testimony. He's starting to tell them how all I could do, Bill, is get myself locked up. They were going to throw me in and throw away the key. And two men of prominence came and saved me from that. Then it goes on to say they had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. Guys, in our modern fellowships, we shy away from words that are important. And one of them is religion. Religion isn't good or bad. We're just describing practices and doctrines and what have you. And most people in churches don't like to be called religious any more than people in recovery rooms want to be called religious. But we do have a religious idea that the foundations of this program and manner of living are based on, and that is that God dwells in you. In you. Power dwells in you. And your problem isn't what you think it is. That's a symptom of a problem. Your real problem is you've lost your identity. You've started believing what the world says you are, and you've started believing what your mind says you are, and you're not paying attention to who God says you are. So, and then a practical program of action is simply learning the facts about me, learning to subdue my ego, make amends for harms done, and then go out and tell others what was done for me. And just keep doing that. Wash, rinse, repeat. So it says that was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. So he's seeing this guy who can't be sober, who is sober, who's telling him of a miraculous event, and he's like, dude, you know me. I don't believe in any of this nonsense. So he came to pass his experience along to me. Why did he come to pass his experience along? Notice how he didn't say his knowledge, his meeting list, his vast wisdom. He just came to share an experience with him. In fact, he did the minute Bill opened the door and saw him standing there fresh-skinned and glowing because he encountered the presence of the living God coming to the door to get him. Pretty powerful, isn't it? You ever heard the religious people tell you he meets you where you are? That's Bill telling you he met me where I was, drunk and drinking. in my rundown flat. He said if I cared to have it, I was shocked but interested. You ever been shocked but interested? Certainly I was interested, but I had to be. I was hopeless. Said he talked for hours, childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past, and they made me swallow hard. Now he's describing a revelation of the Spirit in him. He's going back in time to a grandfather he idolized, and he remembered him making fun of some of the church people and their doings. But on his deathbed, he apparently encountered a preacher, and he basically was absolutely fearless in the face of death and said, "You will not tell me how to worship my God." And he said when he had those recollections, it welled up in him and made him swallow hard. Have you ever had something just well up in you and you all of a sudden had a rush that was affecting your emotions? You didn't even know where it came from. Would you describe that as it making me swallow hard? That's what he's talking about. So he's starting to have evidence of a spirit within him ready to be awakened. Does that make sense? So then he says, that wartime day in the old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I'd always believed in power greater than myself. I'd often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? So his logical mind is causing him to question. Anytime in this book you see a question mark, they want you to go inward and see what he's asking, right? He had a logical mind. He was very worldly. So he goes, how could all that be so precise and not have some kind of creative law or power guiding it? So that's where he's starting to accept the fact that maybe there's something to this after he's had a tangible experience of the Spirit in him moving. Does it make sense? So with ministers in world's religions, I parted right there when they talked of a God personal to me who was love, superhuman strength, and direction. I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. I'm going to jump down to the middle of the page just in interest of saving time because there's a little bit more for Bill to describe to you. He said, but my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God, power had done for him what he could not do for himself. So he was there to bear witness to not a theory. He wasn't given a sermon. He was simply given testimony to something that had been done for him that he had not planned, nor could he have directed. And he was sent to Bill because Bill knew just how bad this guy was. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. So now Bill's in the story. Do you notice how he went in the story? That's why the peer model works. Because once you know that we know, then we know. And now we're all in the story. Does it make sense? Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead. Somebody felt that. What happened? We got a whoo. Somebody must have a spiritual junkie out here. Somebody have been raised from the dead? The man's sitting there before him, talking to him, giving his testimony, and describing his experience as being raised from the dead. How many of you have to admit your last day or days in active addiction were a living death? Suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he'd ever known. That's the description of being recovered. It's a mining term, not a medical term. How many of you have been in the arguments over whether we're recovered or always recovering? Stop arguing about it. There was no medical diagnosis when they wrote this book. They're talking about a mining term, to take what was thought waste and extract something infinitely valuable. That's what it is to recover something in mining. Yes? It's a redemption. So it said, had this power originated in him? He's asking himself the question. So what he's seeing this guy, he can't be sober, but he's sober. He's telling me this fantastical story. I'm feeling his story, and I'm drunk and drinking. And now I'm starting to think logically. Had this power originated in him? And the answer came. Obviously, it did not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me in that minute, and that was none at all. So then he says, that floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Now remember, he doesn't like that, right? I had someone tell me earlier, just because you don't like it doesn't mean it isn't true. And luckily, there is no requirement to like it, but it will go easier for you if at some point you'll accept it. Does it make sense? So he says, here was something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Now listen to what he's going to tell you. Never mind the musty past. He doesn't want to read in a book. He doesn't want to hear about all the miracles that have happened that are recorded in somebody's book. He doesn't want to know that. That's not who Bill is. He said, here sat a miracle right there across my kitchen table. He knew it. He didn't just know it. He knew it. This man's telling me a true story because truth has a feel. And I know this man, he was dead. And now he's alive and he's offering me life. And then he said, he shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasp a new soil. You know what happens when you get on a good solid foundation? You don't blow down in the wind and the rain anymore. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. So even with the miracle, even with all that going on in him, I don't know, right? The Word God still aroused a certain antipathy. Why do we say power around here? Because to a certain percentage of our population, the Word God arouses a certain antipathy. I don't care. I need you to care. We use that word so we can call attention to the experience we're sharing, not to teach you a new religion. Does it make sense? We want to focus you on power and where it's found. That's what we want you to. All right, so when the thought was expressed that there might be a God, personal to me, this feeling was intensified. How many of you, when you started realizing it was happening in you and you'd been saying, no, that can't be real, but what's happening in me? I don't know what. And all of a sudden it got more and more amped up. Have you ever been there? How many of you have taken someone through their step process and they finally realized we're talking about the subject of our experience, not the object of our belief, and the light came on in them, and you're sitting there sharing the light with them? Any of you ever been there for that? Would you describe that as the feeling being intensified? That's what proves to you you can improve consciousness, the awareness of being aware of that power in and on your life. All right, so I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted a thought of the czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. So he's just telling you about his honest doubt and prejudice. But it's okay to bring your honest doubt and prejudice. Just don't use that as an excuse not to outgrow the place of fear you're imprisoned in. Does it make sense? And then it says, I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. Probably everyone we'll ever encounter feels that way if they're honest, because we all feel undeserving in some way because we are undeserving. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. You were chosen. So my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to do one more thing. The one paragraph said, it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. So if you had any experiences in here tonight and you related to the experience of powerlessness, next week we'll have the encounter that they describe in 2, and we'll see if it makes sense to proceed into the decision and into the rest of the actions. Does that make sense? All right, thanks much.